Good day, everyone. Today I will be discussing a parasitic infection or disease caused by a roundworm, which is trichoriasis. Sorry po in advance if there are loud noises in my background. Before we begin, I've prepared an icebreaker activity. Guess the jumbled letters. Trichoriasis is an infection on the large intestine caused by a roundworm in the genus Trichoceros family of Trichoridae. In human disease, the species are Trichoceros trichoria. However, these species also infect other primates. Trichoriasis is one of three well-documented soil-transmitted helminth infections. The other two are ascariasis, caused by the roundworm Ascaris lumbricoides, and hookworm infection caused by two main species of hookworms, Ancylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus. It is considered a neglected tropical disease by WHO and CDC. These diseases are called neglected because they receive less attention and funding for research and control compared to other infectious disease, despite their significant impact on health and quality of life. So these soil-transmitted helminth infections occurs principally in developing tropical or subtropical areas because the climate in these areas provides the ideal conditions for the development and survival of the infective stages of this parasite. Children are most heavily infected due to behaviors like playing in soil na hindi natin alam kung contaminated ba o hindi, having a poor hygiene practices since para sa kanila basta nalublob lang yung tubig sa yung kamay sa tubig ay malinis na. At also yung immune system nila ay still developing making them more vulnerable to this infection. The nematode roundworm, Trichuris trichuria, is also known as a whipworm because it looks like a whip with wide handles at the posterior end and also has a narrow anterior esophagus and a thick posterior anus. The worms are usually pink and attach to the host via the slender anterior end. The size of these worms varies from 30 to 45 millimeter long. The female is usually larger than the male and has a tapering end while the male has a coiled posterior ends. For the mode of transmission, we can acquire this infection through fecal oral transmission. People typically get whipworm infection after consuming dirt or water contaminated with feces containing whipworm parasites or their eggs. Whipworm eggs can get into the soil when contaminated feces are used in fertilizers or when an infected person or animal defecates outside. This is why children are likely to have this infection since they love playing outside at isubo yung mga bagay na nahulog na sa lupa or mga toys na asa lupa na, then after playing may iba na hindi naguhugas ng kamay tapos kakain, some ay ilulublob lang yung kamay nila sa water kasi para sa kanila malinis na yun. There are also people na mahilig kumain ng mga gulay or prutas na hindi nahugasan or hindi masyado nahugasan kasi for them yung mga fruits and veggies na nabili nila sa tindahan ay hugas na without knowing na yung kinakain nila pala ay galing dun sa soil na di natin alam kung contaminated ba or hindi kasi ginagamitan ng feces like yung tae ng kalabaw na maaring merong itlog or yung worm mismo. For the pathogenesis, the first stage, which is the ingestion of infective eggs, we can acquire the infection through fecal oral transmission or by ingesting or consuming whipworm eggs that are present in contaminated food, water, or soil. These eggs are often found in environments where sanitation is poor and human feces are not properly disposed of. The eggs can be ingested through unwashed hands after handling contaminated soil or by consuming raw vegetables and fruits that have been grown in or come into contact with contaminated soil or feces. After that, it will now hatch in the small intestine. Once inside the host, the ingested eggs travel to the small intestine. The digestive juices in the small intestine stimulate the eggs to hatch, releasing the first stage larvae. The newly hatched larvae then penetrate the intestinal villi and undergo several development stages within the intestinal lining. After that, it will now come into the third stage, which is the migration to the large intestine. After about a week, the larvae migrate from the small intestine to the large intestine, specifically the cecum and the ascending colon. In the large intestine, the larvae embed themselves into the epithelial lining of the colon. This site provides the necessary environment for the larvae to mature into adult worms. Next is the attachment and maturation. Adult whipworms have a distinctive shape with a slender, whip-like anterior end and thicker posterior end. The anterior end embeds deeply into the mucosa of the colon, anchoring the worm in place. The embedded anterior end allows the worm to feed on the tissue secretions and blood from the host, which can cause localized damage and inflammation. After that, the female whipworms will now produce eggs. Female whipworms reach sexual maturity approximately 60 to 70 days or 2 months and 10 days after the initial infection. They begin laying eggs that are then excreted with the host feces. Once in the environment, the eggs need to mature in warm, moist soil to become infectious. This process typically takes 15 to 30 days or 2 weeks to 1 month. The cycle can then begin anew when another human ingests these infective eggs. People infected with whipworm can suffer light or heavy infections. People with light infections usually have no symptoms, while people with heavy infections can experience abdominal pain, diarrhea, rectal prolapse, while children with heavy infections can become severely anemic and may grow more slowly. Pasintabi po sa mga kumakain ngayon. So, ito po yung rectal prolapse, which is one of the symptoms in heavy infection. So, para po sa mga hindi alam kung ano yung rectal prolapse is a condition in which the lower portion of the colon just inside the anal canal becomes turned inside out and protrudes outside the body. In a whipworm infection, the rectum loses its internal support because the worms bury their thin heads into the intestinal lining, loosening the elastic epithelium and weakening the surrounding muscles. For the laboratory diagnosis, the standard method for diagnosing the presence of whipworm is by microscopically identifying whipworm eggs in a stool sample. A fresh stool sample is collected and examined for the presence of characteristic whipworm eggs. Also, by using concentration technique like Catocat's technique, help in concentrating the eggs from a larger volume of stool, making them easier to identify under a microscope. So now for the treatment of trichoriasis, we have bendazole. This is given 100 milligrams twice a day for 3 days, and it has been shown to be more effective and is considered first-line treatment. It is not recommended during pregnancy, especially in the first trimester, unless the potential benefits outweigh the risk. Next, we have albendazole. It is an alternative drug and has a lower efficiency than bendazole. Suggested dose is 200 to 400 milligrams twice a day for 3 days. It is also not recommended to use during pregnancy, especially in the first trimester, due to potential harm to the fetus. Last, we have ivermectin. It can be used 200 milligrams daily. It is not as effective as mebendazole and albendazole. It is not be taken during pregnancy unless specifically advised by a healthcare provider. Next, we have the prevention. The best way to prevent infection is to always avoid ingesting soil that may be contaminated with human feces, including where human fecal matter or wastewater is used to fertilize crops. Always wash your hands with soap and water before handling food. Teach children the importance of washing hands to prevent infection. And lastly, wash, peel, or cook all raw vegetables and fruits before eating, particularly those that have been grown in soil and that has been fertilized with manure. We can also prevent further infections to others by not defecating outdoors and effective sewage disposal systems. And that is all for my report, trichoriasis. I hope that you learned something from me and thank you for listening.